The satellite phone crackled, a fragile link stretching thousands of miles from the dust and humming generators of my command tent to the manicured world I'd left behind. On the line was my mother, Linda, a woman whose voice always sounded like she was rushing to a more important conversation. She wasn't calling to ask if I was safe or how I was doing after my last mission. No, she was calling to perform her maternal duty of reminding me about my sister's big day, an event she considered the absolute center of the universe. I have to tell you about my younger sister, Cassie, the family's delicate genius, whose smallest triumphs were treated like national holidays. This time, she was receiving a Community Pillar Award from the town for organizing a single charity bake sale. To hear my mother describe it, you'd think Cassie had personally brokered world peace with a tray of brownies. The breathless descriptions of the dress she'd wear, the importance of the moment. It was all so painfully familiar. "I'm not sure I can make it back to the States in time," I said, choosing my words with military precision. A heavy, practiced sigh came through the receiver, a weapon of disappointment she had perfected over decades. "We just thought it would be nice for you to see what real success looks like for once, honey," she said, her voice dripping with pity. "To get you out of that little office of yours and see your sister shine." Before I could even process the sting of that comment, my father, Mark, a man who measured worth in handshakes and public praise, got on the line. His tone was breezy, which somehow made the blow land even harder. "Just try to be there, okay?" he said, his voice booming with false encouragement. "Even a government clerk can get a few days off. Cassie would love for you to see her shine." Then he hung up. Government clerk. The words hung in the air, echoing in the sudden silence of the tent. After 17 years of deployments, of leading soldiers, of making impossible decisions with lives on the line, that's all I was to them. The internal ledger flipped open in my mind, tallying up every dismissed achievement and every overlooked sacrifice. The rage wasn't hot, it was ice cold, a sharp, clarifying fury that settled deep in my bones. This would be the last time they ever diminished me. And the worst part? This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a story they had carefully written for me, and for the first time, I decided I was going to write a new ending. To understand the punchline of that phone call, to really feel the weight of the words government clerk, you have to understand the world my family built. It was a world with two paths, and they were laid out for my sister and me from the very beginning. One was a glittering, sun-drenched highway paved with praise and gifts. The other was a forgotten dirt road, tolerated but never celebrated. I think the moment I truly understood this was at Cassie's high school graduation party. It was a perfect, sunny day, the kind my parents seemed to order special for her. I remember my father, Mark, a man who believed love was something you could purchase and display, gathering everyone in the driveway. My mother, Linda, who mistook enabling for affection, was practically vibrating with excitement. When they pulled the sheet off the convertible, a gasp rippled through the party guests. It was cherry red, offensively new, and had a giant bow stuck to the hood like something out of a commercial. Cassie, ever the actress, put her hands over her mouth in feigned shock, tears welling in her eyes as everyone applauded her C+ average. And as I stood there, holding the camera they'd given me to document the moment, the internal ledger in my mind began to click. I didn't just see a car. I saw the coding camp I'd wanted to go to, the one they said was too expensive. I saw the busted laptop I'd had to replace with my own part-time job money. I saw years of money as tight speeches, all exposed as a lie in one shiny cherry red moment. Now, contrast that with my own announcement a few years earlier. I stood in that same living room, the fabric of my enlistment papers stiff and official in my hand. There was no party, no cake, and certainly no car. Just a heavy silence broken by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. My mother burst into tears, not of joy, but of what she called abject terror and disappointment. She wailed that I was throwing my life away on a foolish, dangerous whim. My father just shook his head, looking at me not as a daughter making a brave choice, but as a problem he needed to solve. "Well," he said, his voice flat and cold, "I guess that's one way to get some discipline." There was no pride. There was no hug. My future was just a failure, preemptively declared. You see, My career became an inconvenience to their carefully crafted family image. A daughter in the military, an officer no less, didn't fit the Christmas card photo. It was messy, it was dangerous, and worst of all, it was something they couldn't easily brag about at their country club. So, they simply changed the story. They scrubbed the truth away until all that was left was a bland, palatable lie. When I graduated from officer candidate school, they told friends and family I was doing some entry-level admin work for the government. It sounded respectable but unimportant, which was perfect for them. My deployments became corporate retreats to undisclosed locations. My promotions, the very things I worked tirelessly for, were met with a confused silence. I remember calling them, my captain's bars feeling heavy and significant in my hand, and my mother just said, "Oh, that's nice, dear," before immediately changing the subject to Cassie's latest yoga instructor. My steady, quiet ascent through the ranks of second lieutenant, then first lieutenant, captain, and eventually major. It was all invisible. It didn't fit their narrative of Cassie, the brilliant, successful daughter, and me, the difficult one who ran off to play soldier in a dusty, faraway office. The lie was easier than the truth. And Cassie, she wasn't just a passive bystander in all of this. She was an active participant, the co-author of my fictional life. She leaned into her role as the golden child with relish, using my manufactured mediocrity as a backdrop to make her own life seem more dazzling. She would call me, complaining for 20 minutes about the stress of choosing a new color to paint her living room, never once pausing to ask where I was or what I was doing. To her, I was just a vaguely disappointing government employee, a reliable shadow who existed to make her light seem brighter. I remember one call in particular. I was overseeing a nighttime logistics operation, the air thick with the smell of jet fuel and the tension of a dozen moving parts. My phone buzzed with a video call from her. She was at a brunch spot, a mimosa in her hand. "Ugh, you won't believe it," she sighed dramatically. "The caterer for my fundraiser brought the wrong kind of mini quiche. My whole day is ruined." I just stared at her, the chaos of my reality a universe away from her manufactured drama. She never even noticed the background noise on my end. I tried once to bridge that gap. I tried to explain what I actually did for a living. We were on a rare video call and I thought, maybe if I just tell her, she'll understand. "I'm an Army aviation officer, Cassie," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "I command and coordinate flight missions." She stared at me blankly for a second, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Then she let out a little laugh, a dismissive puff of air. "Oh," she said, twirling a piece of her hair. "So, you basically just file flight plans? Gosh, that sounds boring." The dismissal was so casual, so absolute. And in that moment, I knew. They didn't want to know the real me. The boring clerk was more comfortable for them. Lying on my cot that night, thousands of miles from the life they thought I was living, I realized they would never choose to see me. So I decided I was going to make it impossible for them to look away. The anger from that phone call didn't just burn out and fade away. Instead, it cooled, it hardened, and it sharpened into something new and profoundly useful. It became a tool. A strange sense of calm washed over me in the hours that followed, the kind of quiet, absolute focus that comes just before a complex mission. The hurt that had defined my relationship with my family for 2 decades finally dissolved. For the first time, I wasn't wounded by their narrative anymore. I was liberated from it. The goal was no longer to beg for a seat at their table or try to earn their love. The goal was to reclaim my own story with a truth so loud it would deafen them. My receipts weren't going to be angry text messages or a tearful, dramatic confrontation. My receipts were the life they refused to see. They were the crisp, meticulously maintained dress uniform hanging in my locker. They were the silver oak leaf insignias on my shoulders, each one earned through years of sacrifice and relentless effort. They were the command in my voice that my soldiers followed without question. And the biggest receipt of all was sitting on the flight line just 100 yards away, a 16,000-pound machine of power and purpose. A 60 Black Hawk. I wasn't going to tell them who I was. I was going to show them. The plan began to form, not out of malice, but out of a beautiful tactical opportunity that felt almost like fate. I pulled up my rotation schedule on my tablet, the glowing text cutting through the dark of my tent, and there it was, a mandatory strategic debriefing at a major U.S. base. The date made my breath catch in my throat. It was the exact same weekend as Cassie's bake sale victory lap ceremony. I zoomed out on the digital map, my heart starting to beat a little faster. The base was less than 50 miles from my hometown. A 45-minute flight, maybe less. It was perfect. I didn't have to ask for a favor or break any rules. The mission was already approved: transport my command team and myself back to the States. All I had to do was make one small official adjustment. A quick stop. The justification was easy enough to draft, full of the beautiful, technically correct bureaucracy that makes the military run. It would be a logistics stop to facilitate interagency coordination with local officials regarding future training opportunities. It wasn't even a lie, really. I was an agent of a federal agency, and the mayor was a local official. It was perfect. The next morning, I found the final piece of my plan. I sought out my pilot, Chief Warrant Officer 4 Davis, or Dave as he preferred when we weren't in a formal setting. Dave was a seasoned veteran who had been flying Army helicopters since before I'd even enlisted, a man of immense skill and very few words. He'd flown me through sandstorms and into hostile territories, and he understood more from a look than most people did from a long conversation. He knew my capabilities, and he had my back, always. His respect was something I had earned, and it meant more to me than any hollow praise from my parents. I found him doing pre-flight checks, his movements economical and precise. "Dave," I said, my voice all business, "I need to add a stop to our flight plan when we get stateside." I unrolled a sectional chart over the hood of a nearby Humvee. My finger tapped on a small green patch of land right next to a municipal building in a tiny town he'd never heard of. "Right here," I said. "It's a city park. LZ should be clear." He squinted at the chart, tracing the coordinates, then looked up at me. There was no judgment in his eyes, no curiosity, just professional assessment. He saw his commanding officer, a lieutenant colonel, giving a directive. After a long moment, a slow grin spread across his face. He nodded once. "The LZ looks clear, ma'am," he said, his voice low and steady. "We can make that happen. Official business." I had the aircraft. I had the official orders. I had the perfect audience. All that was left was to make my entrance. The flight from the base was short, but it felt like the longest 45 minutes of my life. Below us, the patchwork of green and gray suburbia scrolled by, getting more and more familiar. Through my headset, I could hear Dave's calm, professional voice confirming our approach vector. I didn't feel nervous. I felt still. It was the stillness that comes when you've already made the decision, and all that's left is to witness the outcome. We crested a small hill, and I saw it. The town park. A splash of green dotted with the pathetic white of folding chairs. It was exactly as I had imagined. It was a perfect, sunny afternoon, the kind of day that made small-town ceremonies feel grander than they were. White chairs were arranged in neat rows on the grass, facing a small, rickety-looking stage decorated with limp balloons in Cassie's favorite color, a garish shade of pink. The town mayor was at the podium, his voice a droning monotone amplified by a cheap speaker system. I could see my family in the front row. My father, Mark, looked puffed up with pride, his chest practically bursting. My mother, Linda, was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, already overcome with emotion. And on the stage, in a chair slightly grander than the rest, sat Cassie herself. She was preening, soaking in the adoration like a flower turning to the sun, a small, cheap-looking plaque resting in her lap. Then, the world began to change. It started as a faint whisper on the edge of hearing, a rhythmic pulse that didn't belong. A few people in the back rows turned their heads, annoyed at the interruption. The sound grew steadily, insistently, from a whisper to a rumble. The mayor's voice began to get lost in the noise as the rumble deepened into the unmistakable, concussive thump-wump-wump-wump of heavy rotor blades. Conversations faltered. Heads turned from the stage to the sky. searching for the source of this auditory invasion. The sound wasn't just heard anymore, it was felt, a vibration in the chest, a physical presence that demanded attention. Suddenly, the 60 Blackhawk cleared the tree line. It was a monster of dark metal against the placid blue sky, a vision of pure power and intent. I watched as Dave brought us in, his control flawless. We didn't land far away, we descended with military precision onto the adjacent athletic field, the landing zone we had marked on the map. The downdraft from the rotors hit the ceremony like a contained hurricane. It tore the balloons from their moorings, sending them scattering into the sky. It whipped napkins and paper programs into a vortex of confetti. It flipped a flimsy table laden with cookies and lemonade, sending the fruits of Cassie's labor crashing to the ground. The mayor stopped speaking, his mouth hanging open as he grabbed the podium to keep from being blown over. The entire perfect scene was shattered in an instant. The engine noise spooled down, and in the relative quiet, the side door slid open with a hydraulic hiss. I took a breath. Then, I stepped out. I wasn't wearing the casual clothes they might have expected. I was in my immaculate Army service uniform. My shoes were polished to a mirror shine. The crease in my trousers was sharp enough to cut glass, and on my shoulders, catching the afternoon sun, were the silver oak leaf insignias of a lieutenant colonel. I walked down the steps with a calm, measured purpose, my back straight, my gaze fixed forward. Behind me, Dave and my crew chief disembarked, their movements just as crisp and professional. We walked across the grass, the three of us, a vision from a world my family couldn't even imagine. As we reached the edge of the stunned crowd, CW4 Davis stopped, turned to me, and snapped to attention. He delivered a salute so sharp, so precise, it seemed to cut the air. In a voice that was clear, respectful, and carried across the entire silent park, he stated the facts. Lieutenant Colonel Rourke, the aircraft is secure. We're on schedule for the briefing at Fort McNair. Every eye swiveled from the helicopter to me. I saw my father's proud smile melt into a mask of slack-jawed confusion. His brain was visibly trying, and failing, to connect the daughter he called a clerk, with the high-ranking officer being saluted in front of him. I saw my mother's hand fly to her mouth, her look of tender pride replaced with sheer, uncomprehending shock, but my eyes found Cassie. She was frozen on the stage, her forgotten award clutched in her hands. Her face was a breathtaking canvas of disbelief turning to a dawning, sickening horror. The condescending smirk she always wore when she looked at me was gone. In its place was the terrified recognition that her shadow had just become the sun. The mayor, finally recovering, began walking towards me, his hand outstretched, a flustered, impressed look on his face. And in the deafening silence of their shattered reality, I didn't say a word to them. I didn't have to. My presence was the only statement that ever mattered. I shook the mayor's hand firmly, accepting his flustered but sincere thanks for my service. He asked a few questions about my work, his eyes wide with a respect I had never once seen in my own father's face. I kept my answers brief, professional, and polite. Over his shoulder, I could see my family huddled together, looking like shipwreck survivors on the shore of a world they no longer recognized. My mother was gesturing wildly, my father was staring at the ground, and Cassie just looked broken. I didn't feel a shred of triumph. I didn't feel anger. I felt nothing but a vast, quiet distance. I concluded my conversation with the mayor, giving him my official contact information for the record. Then, I turned my head and gave my family a single unreadable nod. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't an invitation. It was a dismissal, a final silent period at the end of a very long and painful sentence. Then, without a backward glance, I turned and walked back across the grass. Each step felt lighter than the last. The rhythmic thump-thump of the idling rotor blades was the sound of my real life calling me home. I climbed into the helicopter, strapped myself in, and as we lifted off, I watched their small, shocked figures shrink into insignificance below. Later that evening, on the flight to the debriefing at Fort McNair, I finally turned my phone back on. It was a mistake. The device convulsed in my hand as 2 weeks of radio silence erupted into a nuclear explosion of notifications. A tidal wave of their panic and rage washed over my screen. There were dozens of missed calls from my parents. Then came the texts. The first few from my mother were just strings of question marks. Then came the accusations. How could you embarrass your sister like this? And you deliberately ruined the most important day of her life. It was all about Cassie's day, Cassie's feelings, Cassie's moment. As always, Cassie's own texts were a masterclass in narcissistic injury, evolving in real time. They started with pure disbelief. What was that? Then came the rage. You couldn't just let me have one thing, could you? You always have to be the center of attention. The final ones, sent hours later, descended into a pathetic, self-pitying mess. Everyone is laughing at me. I hope you're happy. You've ruined my life. I read through them, one after another, feeling not anger, but a profound and final sense of detachment. It was like watching a bad movie with actors I no longer knew. I put the phone on silent, placed it face down, and didn't reply to a single message. A few weeks later, my new life had settled into a rhythm. It was a life defined by competence, mutual respect, and a quiet sense of purpose. I was back in my element, leading a planning session for a complex joint-to-service exercise. My days were filled with briefings, strategic analysis, and the camaraderie of a team that valued me for my mind and my leadership, not for the role I was supposed to play in a dysfunctional family drama. The noise of their chaos had faded, replaced by the satisfying hum of a life I had built for myself, on my own terms. One afternoon, a package arrived at my office. It was a thick, heavy envelope, with my mother's familiar loopy handwriting on the front. I took it back to my quarters that evening, a strange sense of clinical curiosity washing over me. It was a long, rambling, handwritten letter, 10 pages of pure, uncut guilt. It was filled with excuses, with accusations of how I had humiliated them in front of the whole town. It was a monument to their inability to see beyond themselves. The apology I had once craved my entire life finally came, buried on page 8. It was a self-serving, hollow little thing that read, "I'm sorry if your feelings were hurt, but we just don't understand why you felt the need to hide your real career from us." They still thought I had hidden it. They couldn't comprehend that they had simply refused to see it. I read the letter once, folded it neatly, and walked over to the small office shredder beside my desk. I fed the first page in, and the machine whirred to life, chewing my mother's carefully chosen words into meaningless strips of paper. Page by page, I erased their final attempt to control the narrative. This wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of sanitation. It was me, finally and completely, taking out the trash. I heard an update a month or so later, through a cousin who had always been kind to me. Apparently, my arrival was now the stuff of local legend. Cassie's Community Pillar Award had become a town joke, a punchline about her being upstaged by her clerk sister who, as it turned out, commanded helicopters. My parents, she said, had stopped talking about either of their daughters entirely. They hadn't changed, of course. People like them rarely do. Their stage had just been taken away, and their lead actress had been exposed as a fraud. Their power over me, and over the truth, was gone. My life, however, has never been clearer or more my own. For years, I fought for a seat at their table, but it took a helicopter to realize I was meant to have my own sky. If you've ever had to build your own worth when no one else would, share your story in the comments. Your salute is waiting.